could have been argued that after the Bondi attacks, Anthony Albanese had finally scraped the very bottom of the barrel. The wood was splintered, the paint was peeled. I mean, refusing to call a royal commission into the worst terror attack in Australian history, an attack that many had warned was coming, that was simply baffling. It took, among others, an 88-year-old former swimmer to finally shame the Prime Minister of this country into doing the right thing.
I will also call out people that have done the wrong thing and who have not stood up for this great country. And to you, Anthony Albanese, Tony Burke, Penny Wong, come down off your high horse and stop trying to run for cover. If the Jewish community is calling for a royal commissioner, then do the right thing by this community.
And then, having been dragged kicking and screaming and clinging to the shag pile into calling a royal commission, Anthony Albanese had the gall to boast that he deserved credit for it.
We've also made sure that we've got this right in an orderly way. This is actually a record time for the calling of a royal commission.
Yeah, it's record time if you measure urgency using a sundial. Albanese refused to take any personal responsibility for the attack, despite the fact anti-Semitism had exploded on his watch. He eventually said he was sorry for what Jewish Australians had experienced. What he's never said to this day is that he's sorry for what he did or didn't do that helped cultivate a climate in which such an atrocity could occur. Instead, we were treated to the great political non-apology of our age. Everyone could have done more. And then the PM boasted that he, unlike lesser mortals, has never played politics with the issue of anti-Semitism or the Bondi attack.
There shouldn't be any politics in this. This is a moment for the nation to come together. That is something that I have done. I haven't responded to some of the political comments that have been made, including by Mr Frydenberg. I have engaged respectfully, seeking to lower the temperature of this debate.
Now, I've got to admit, that was a good one. This from the man who appointed an envoy to combat anti-Semitism, but then insisted on appointing an envoy to combat Islamophobia as well. Not political, just the diplomatic equivalent of cutting the cake exactly down the middle so no one can accuse you of giving the other a bigger slice. And the man who's never played politics with anti-Semitism refused to consider recommendations on combating anti-Semitism until he'd received recommendations on combating Islamophobia. Again, that wasn't politics, that was just, well, you know, combining the hate speech laws with the gun laws in his anti-Semitism legislation. That wasn't playing politics either. The fact that stapling two unrelated bills together just happened to drive a wedge between the Liberals and the Nationals was apparently one of those delightful cosmic coincidences. Albanese could never have imagined such an outcome. He's as surprised as anyone when gravity works. So, yes, it could reasonably have been argued many times over the past 2 years, and especially over the past 4 weeks, that Anthony Albanese had reached rock bottom. But I have to say, those assessments were tragically premature, because yesterday, just when you thought there was no lower depth left to plumb, the Prime Minister discovered a whole new underground aquifer of absurdity. During a heated question time, the same PM who said this at the start of the week,
we must channel our anger into meaningful action to ensure an atrocity such as this can never happen again. And that responsibility starts with me as Australia's 31st Prime Minister.
Said this yesterday afternoon.
The idea that anti-Semitism began 2 years ago with the change of government is false, and it's declared to be false by the comments of those opposite in senior positions. Despite the surge in anti-Semitism on their watch, did the Morrison government appoint a special envoy to combat anti-Semitism? No.
I'll never play politics with anti-Semitism. Now, can we talk about the Liberals' record? Responsibility for tackling anti-Semitism starts with me. So let's begin with a historical audit of Scott Morrison. But wait, as I said, every declaration that Albanese has finally reached rock bottom has proven wildly optimistic, because this morning Anthony Albanese took his left-wing progressive shovel and decided to dig just a little bit more. When asked this morning why he'd pointed the finger at Scott Morrison, the PM replied up, "I never."
I didn't mention him at all. What I did was I quoted the ministers in his government at the time.
Here's the PM yesterday.
Despite the surge in anti-Semitism on their watch, did the Morrison government appoint a special envoy to combat anti-Semitism? No.
Here's the PM today.
I didn't mention him at all.
He never mentioned Scott Morrison in the same way that he never fell off the stage.
Okay.
Prime Minister, we saw that you fell from the stage in Cessnock this afternoon. Are you okay?
No, I stepped back one step. I didn't fall off the stage.
So in Albanese's Australia, you're not supposed to believe your lying ears or your lying eyes. No wonder they hate social media so much, but I digress. Albanese was asked again about his criticism of Scott Morrison.
Scott Morrison has today described you delusional and cheap for trying to shift blame. Were you trying to shift blame, and what do you make of his comments?
Not at all.
Really?
I was simply making the point by quoting what members said at that time in 2018-19. We have strengthened hate laws. We have not sought to go over all the detail of the time when we had an Attorney-General in this country who said that you have a right to be a bigot. We have know that at that time the attempt to work with to abolish Section 18C occurred under the former government.
So first the PM denies ever mentioning Scott Morrison, and then the PM argues that if he did mention Scott Morrison, it wouldn't have been an exercise in blame shifting, before immediately going on to explain why the Liberals should be blamed. This is not whataboutism, you understand. This is merely what about the Liberals? Foreign Minister Penny Wong also joined the performance, bravely insisting on national television this morning that the Prime Minister never tried to shift responsibility for anti-Semitism onto Scott Morrison.
Why did the PM blame Scott Morrison when this wave of anti-Semitism and the Bondi attacks happened on your watch?
The PM was making the point that anti-Semitism is an ancient hatred. We do know, and the Prime Minister has acknowledged this, that since October 7 we have seen anti-Semitism increase around the world, including here in Australia. And that is an issue for all of us.
He shouldn't have done that, though. He was passing the buck.
Well, I don't think that is at all what he is doing, and I think the Prime Minister has been very clear about the responsibility he feels.
I understand. Albanese wasn't blaming Scott Morrison by blaming Scott Morrison. And nor was Albanese passing the buck by passing comment on Scott Morrison. As Penny Wong said, the Prime Minister has been very clear about the responsibility he feels. And now he just wants to talk about the responsibility he feels that other people should feel. I could spend the rest of the program outlining for you the differences between the Morrison government's approach to Israel and the Albanese government's, but I'm not going to bother, and for two reasons. First, Scott Morrison summed it up pretty well last night. Hamas never praised the Morrison government. Hamas did praise the Albanese government. That rather does the heavy lifting. And here's the second reason I won't compare or contrast Morrison's record with Albanese's. Because, well, it's rather beside the point. The point is not what the last government did. The point is what this government has done or has failed to do. And that the Prime Minister still doesn't get that, well, it's frankly depressing. But then again, it's all rather depressing, isn't it? With everyone on all sides of Parliament admitting the laws passed last night failed to really address anti-Semitism as we should, the PM was asked if he would consider taking the time to have another go at getting the laws right. Well, he wasn't interested, not even remotely.
If you can't get support for these laws in the aftermath of a massacre, it is difficult to see people changing their mind.
To which the public might reply, if as Prime Minister you're unwilling to do whatever it takes to get the laws right after a massacre, it's difficult to see us changing our mind about you. Which brings me back to Penny Wong. Is it just me, or did you too find her comments on the Today Show this morning more than a little frustrating? Let me just show you two clips that, frankly, really annoyed me. Here's the first.
The legislation that was passed last night is really important legislation. It deals with two issues. The two issues, as the Prime Minister said, are these. When the Bondi attackers went to Bondi, they had hatred in their minds and guns in their hands. And the national security package of legislation we passed last night tackles both of those.
The alleged Bondi attackers went to Bondi with hatred in their minds and guns in their hands. Is it just me, or do you shake your head and sigh when you hear that line from our government's senior ministers? They repeat it regularly. They're supposed to be serious people, and they're meant to treat us like serious people. Instead, we get these trite lines, no doubt workshopped by a back room full of communications graduates armed with whiteboards and soy lattes. The alleged Bondi attackers had hatred in their minds and guns in their hands. It's a very elaborate way of saying they were allegedly Islamic jihadists targeting Jews. Could we, for the love of civilisation, stop treating the public like fragile porcelain figurines and just call things what they are? And then there was this gem. Penny Wong was asked whether under Labor's new laws, people would be able to say things like Israel's committing a genocide. Now, don't worry too much about the specifics of that, but have a listen to what Penny Wong says about the government's position on Israel.
So under the legislation, people will still be able, or groups will still be able to say that?
Well, I'm not going to get into, it's not hypotheticals about what can and can't be said. I'm making a point about the way the legislation works.
Do you think people should be able to say that?
I don't believe that, well, the government's position is that the State of Israel has a right to exist, and we seek two states because that is the best way to ensure long-term peace and security for both Israelis and Palestinians.
All right.
Wow, how generous. That's the Albanese government's position. Israel has a right to exist. Well, that's mighty kind of the Albanese government. If you asked me what I thought of you, and I replied, well, I believe you have the right to exist, you wouldn't exactly count that as warmth, would you? Albanese government ministers can keep delivering all the platitudes they like, but that response from Penny Wong tells you everything you need to know. The frightening part is that it also tells those among us who want to continue demonising Jews everything they need to know as well, no matter what the laws were that were passed last night.